Ever since, any technology innovation has always made humanity better, but it didn't happen by accident. When a technology as powerful as AI is coming into play, and there's a role we can play now by making sure that the use of those technologies is done in a responsible fashion.
Welcome to the Microsoft Partner Network podcast. Every week, we bring in industry leaders and Microsoft partners to talk about the big ideas shaping business and technology today. Welcome back to the Microsoft Partner Network podcast. I'm at Microsoft Inspire today and joined by Ganesh Padmanabhan. He is the VP of Global Business Development and Marketing at Cognitive Scale. He recently was a named member of the Forbes Technology Council. How cool is that? And cooler for me, Rachel Braunstein, he went to the University of Texas, Austin MBA program. So we are Macomies.
And hook 'em horns.
So with that, please tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey to Cognitive Scale.
Sure. No, thanks so much for having me here. It's great to be here at Inspire. Again, I remember last year, I don't think you guys had this podcast last year, or maybe I just wasn't there for it. Anyway, so a little bit about myself. I'm an Austinite now for 10 years. It's the longest I've ever lived anywhere in my life. Being in the tech industry pretty much all my career, mechanical engineering by education, never worked a day in mechanical engineering, but then very much figured out the computers was the cooler thing at that time and then got into it. Spent a lot of time with tech giants like Intel and Dell, and then some startups earlier on in my career. Mostly focused on how do you bring disruptive new technologies to market. And that journey got me into AI and cognitive scale as well. A couple of years ago, I was coming off a very successful, very, very fortunate run at Dell. Spent almost a decade there. And I was exploring what's next for me and what's next for the market and what can I contribute in. And then I wanted to do something in data and AI because that was my background. And then I found cognitive scale almost by accident. I was trying to convince an investor who's the chairman of Cognitive Scale to invest in an idea that I had to start my own company, but I went and met the people at Cognitive Scale, and there was a lot of fun things going on, and I joined the fun.
Awesome. So you didn't create that company, or you had a company and then were you bought out?
Yeah, no. I had a company. It was more like we were very early. We were trying to evolve from being just consulting for problems to what do I need to do for products, and then I started talking to investors to see if I can get some seed money to start the company. And then one of the known investors in the Austin ecosystem who's the executive chairman for Cognitive Scale. Was one of my buddies who said, the only person who understands AI and who'll give you money in Austin is this person, right? So it was one of those chance meetings that led to, really great things. I met the rest of the team, and they were looking for how do we actually scale the business. They'd built a great technology platform. They have amazing customer references last year when I met them. And they were looking to how do you go from a startup to a scale-up and a growth stage business. And it was a perfect time for me to apply my experience before that at Dell, helping scale the cloud business, the big data analytics business, the HPC business, to go into helping them do that too. And it was like the best of both worlds for me. I was getting an opportunity to go work with, one of the leading technology companies in the industry in AI, with a group of people that I just love working with, and be able to actually apply a lot of the learnings I've actually taken and learned in the past. So it was, best of all worlds, if you will.
That's awesome. I was reading about Cognitive Scale, and you say augmented intelligence instead of artificial intelligence. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Of course, yeah. Well, most companies, most AI companies or companies who claim they do AI, it's all about all the press around AI is all about replacing human beings. I mean, it's pretty unfortunate that the narrative for AI is being written by Hollywood than anybody else. So when you think of AI, you think about the big red button. You think about Terminator. You think about
Ready Player One.
Ready Player
I
One,
just
right?
Watched that.
That's an amazing book, amazing movie. So, but when we were thinking about this, and the founding team at Cognitive Scale was thinking about it, like, why can't it be a little different? I mean, imagine we all have Waze. We use Waze for our navigation app. which allows us to navigate through the crazy traffic, through inside streets, giving us real-time insights on what's happening, what road to take, what turns to avoid, where is the next intersection, the blockade coming up and stuff like that. Why can't you use AI to apply the same thing, to augment the human in the picture? Right? That's how we arrived at this notion of augmented intelligence. And the whole idea is a little bit of AI, if applied to actually augment and having the human in the loop, will go a long way than, getting into replacing human beings and automation and stuff. There's place for all of that, but the immediate and the larger opportunity is about applying AI, machine learning, natural language processing, computer vision to augment human potential, to augment human creativity and ingenuity, and that's where we focused on.
So what do you say when robots are taking over? What is it? You say AI will not replace people's jobs.
Yeah, I would say, AI will replace some jobs, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a couple of different things you think about, right? People love to talk about the 800,000 jobs that we're going to lose to AI, right? But the potential of 1.2 billion jobs that could be impacted positively to AI, that doesn't get the press, right? It's like fake news.
Right.
And so when you think about AI will replace jobs, mundane, repetitive automation jobs, just like computers did. Just like, we don't have specialized calculators of math in offices anymore, right? I mean, there used to be, folks who did that. But you have, what it also does is just like every technology innovation that has happened in the history of mankind, it'll always replace some part of what humans do today, right? I mean, otherwise there's no efficiency, there's no adoption because of that, right? There's no charm to it. But what it'll also do is actually create net new opportunities, net new jobs. We didn't have podcasting and digital marketing before the internet. Right?
Yeah.
It was not a job. It was nobody even thought about it. Everybody knew marketing, but nobody knew you had to think through marketing channels and digital channels and stuff as a function, as a profession. So similarly, what we're going to see with AI as well is, yes, it's going to have some loss of employment and stuff, but mostly on the part that is very well understood, the functions or human cognitive functions that are very well understood and very, very mature, if you will, right? There's not a lot of creativity to be put into that.
What's
Those
an
kind
example
of
that?
So, today already we are seeing things like, take an example of a process we helped automate, for a client. I mean, there's a classic example is robotic process automation, for example. Companies like UiPath, Blue Prism, there's a lot of folks who specialize in that. What it basically is how do I actually do a rules-based engine, a robot, that'll just perform certain functions as it's told, right? And the performing certain functions might be, an example might be, hey, if you get a file, where do I file it? Or where do I actually update different fields in different spreadsheets, if you will? I mean, humans do that most of the time today. That is an easily automatable job because there's not a lot of creativity applied to it, right? Now, the problem happens when you actually have that same process and you can't understand what the text in that column actually says, or it says something, it means something else. You need a human to actually intervene, right? An example for that is like, if we did this for a large healthcare system at cognitive scale around invoice processing. The hospital, the integrated system was processing about 300,000 invoices a month. 60% of that goes through without any issue through their automation process. 40% gets flagged as an exception, and then some human checker had to come in and look to make sure the POs match the contracts, that match the invoices, and the fields are right, the match codes exceptions are right, and so forth, and then they take action, right? Now, what we did there in that case is apply AI to make that person's job easier and make it more efficient. So instead of them going through multiple documents, instead of them going through multiple fields and identifying these things, we look at data, we look at multiple sources, we look at history, and then highlight to them saying, hey, you might actually want to look at these suggestion review patterns that says, these are probably the most likely cases these particular 6 invoices are being rejected. So again, the same example, you're still automating a little bit, you're still trying to actually make human cognitive decision-making, you're mimicking that in software and in machine intelligence. But you're doing it in a path of actually trying to make the job of the human checker easier, right? I like to say, right, we hardly understand how the human brain works. So forget the human mind and consciousness and all the big things. So robots, as walking, talking, general purpose robots, building superhuman robots on itself, That's 50 years away or more, maybe more.
So
right?
Westworld
Westworlds are,
is
well, I have my personal theory on Westworld, but it's a Westworld is it's probably general purpose thinking robots that actually develops consciousness. Yeah, we are way far away from that.
but possible.
You can never say you can't say anything is not possible, right? In this world, where who would have thought we would have landed on the moon?
Yeah.
Right, and who would have thought we will send a unmanned ship to Mars? Who would have said we will put a convertible up there on the, orbiting the Earth?
Yeah.
So it just, there's so many things that we don't think are possible. So you can't really negate or just alleviate that possibility. What it does do is, players like, or industry leaders like, Microsoft, like Cognitive Scale, like Intel, all these big players have a role to play in this, right? And it's like saying, ever since any technology innovation has always made humanity better, but it didn't happen by accident because somebody thought about it and said, how do I make sure that I make the use of this technology in a responsible fashion? So, even though, the nuclear bombs were invented, it was more used for productive purposes, and of course, geopolitical reasons, of course, right? But there is a role that the industry has to play, and I think that's the greater opportunity. When a technology as powerful as AI is coming into play, and it's going to be such a huge thing in the future, and we all know this distant future where everything's going to be AI, there's a role we can play now by making sure that the use of those technologies is done in a responsible fashion, right? And Cognitive Scale, we announced an initiative last month around responsible AI, about positively impacting 1 billion people through AI by the year 2020. And that count runs at about a couple of hundred millions right now because we are at 25 plus Fortune 500 companies, and we impact big, massive enterprise systems. But there's more we can do, and there's more as we scale and grow as well. And there's a lot of things that we can do today that'll have a lasting impact on how this technology is used in the future.
What does responsible AI mean to you?
In a nutshell, I would say think about it as the responsible use of this powerful technology, right? And that comes in multiple different facets, right? Simple things from how do you ensure the customers, or whoever data you're using, you have the right ownership and rights and access to go do that. Are you using the data responsibly? It could go to a little bit more sophisticated kind of elements around how do you, when you're using machines to make automated decisions that impact humans, how do you ensure there's no bias in those decision making, right? It could be even further on, like how do you ensure that rogue AI systems don't go, how do you make sure there's no Chuckies running around with knives in their hand and slitting people's thoughts? It's a visual
Very
for
visual,
sure.
yes.
But how do you prevent against that? How do you provide that big red button that you can you do a kill switch to turn off before something really goes crazy, right? It's a collection of principles that we can apply to this use of the technology in the way you can put a governance or a guardianship around it that ensures that it's used in a responsible fashion, right? That's the whole umbrella I would call responsible AI. And there are very specific elements and things that we can do there. And as I said, like the 3 big examples is one is data ownership and privacy. Very simple, everybody can do it today. If you're using a customer data, do you have consent to use that data? GDPR was a boon in that regard, right? Second is around ethical AI, right? So it's about ensuring that you have fairness and human rights and lack of bias is all maintained within the decision-making framework. And then 3, it's like the ethics switch or the kill switch, if you will. So how do you make sure that you have a way to turn off the AI if it goes rogue? So those are some ways you can make it practical.
Can you talk a little bit about companies actually? How can companies keep their algorithms bias-free? That would mean you need a pretty diverse and inclusive workforce, which I look around and I see a lot of guys around me here. I'm just curious, as we look at the future, how do you do that when in fact the workforce is not necessarily diverse and inclusive?
It's the way you think. It's interesting, right? On the one hand, you have the notion of if your goal is to mimic human cognition and human intelligence, do you just mimic the way humans are?
Right.
Right? So which includes bias, which includes things
Right.
like that, right? The other hand, the question is, do you really model it in the way that truly should be? And what is right versus wrong? There's all these moral questions that come into play. But that said, I'll take an example of something like this, right? If you're a government, and what they're trying to do is actually build out the next generation of what does the automated decision framework look like for big civic decisions, right? And things like immigration, things like how do you make decisions on who gets a grant for a socioeconomic situation and so forth. A classic practical example of bias in that scenario is if you're building a machine algorithm or an AI to actually go do this automated decision making. AI only functions, it trains, it learns from the data you feed it, right? So if you're feeding it biased data, there's a good chance that it leads to biased decisions, right? And then so how do you prevent against that? How do you ensure there is enough diversity in the data that you're using to train the AI? That's one very practical example of how you can do this. The other side of this could be even like having the human in the loop, right? How do you make sure that when you are not sure that a decision is not clearly black and white, right? Bring in the human intuition to actually make that particular thing and use that process to train the AI to mimic that human decision-making process. So there's very practical ways of doing this. I mean, again, you can get really enamored about things like what is right, what is wrong, what's the ideal model, and what should be the distribution. There's all these technical things, but at a very very simplistic level, you can look at it from these two areas. And I think Microsoft has done the same thing on their facial recognition software. About a couple of weeks ago, I think I read the article around how they had looked at it and say, how do you ensure that your accuracy of detecting Caucasian faces versus brown faces versus Asian faces or any other is consistent, or the accuracy is maintained across, right? They did the same thing, which is how do you actually have enough variability in the data, there's no bias in the data, and then how do you make sure that those decisions are actually, algorithms are reviewed and run across multiple macro data sets to arrive at the right decision. So there's a lot of these practical techniques, and I say, as I go back to this saying, there's a big role that companies like Cognitive Scale, who's in the forefront of this AI revolution, companies like Microsoft, who is in the forefront of enterprise software, we have to play in actually to making this real, making it responsible.
How is Cognitive Scale, so I'm thinking about partners listening, what are you doing in your practices, either in the way you hire talent or in your operations, to help free up some of this bias, protect customers' data?
So first off, I think at Cognitive Scale, we're building an enterprise platform that think of us like as a middleware for AI, right? We are a virtualization layer for AI, which allows you to actually take all these ML, NLP, computer vision kind of techniques and apply to a business process and drive business value, right? So we're closer to the business process. One of the things in this market, it's, in AI, in the market in general, in AI, is repeatability of problems, right? Because every problem is unique and every data is unique for every customer and stuff. So there's a lot of repeatability that we're building in on the core platform that makes the process of solving specific unique problems for customers easier, right? Mm-hmm. Now that also has, a few other things, right? There is a core software which we have, we have a marketplace of assets, software assets that runs on the platform. We have the platform that bridges the life cycle of an AI across data science analytics to all the way to, software development and SDLC. We have a, Edge, we call it Edge, which is an optimization for protecting customer data and privacy, and how do you run it on-prem versus multi-cloud versus different scenarios. And then there is the big element. So that's all the software elements, but there is the expertise and there is a method aspect of AI. And for partners who are looking at doing it, and we have learned this, we're 5 years old, and a lot of battle scars around learning about AI and working across 100 plus Fortune 500 clients. Expertise is very critical, right? Human expertise, hiring is one of the toughest thing to do in this market, right? And it's always hard to attract good talent and retain them. So we really focus a lot on that. And I think, they say there is one aspect is how do you hire the smartest people who can do this? The other aspect is how do you use software to make the skills required to use and solve these problems lower than what it is today, right? So we balance that approach really well. And the last thing is the method that we use, right? We are very popular in the industry for this method we call 10-10-10, which basically stands for in 10 hours in a couple of workshops, we work with a client to identify their first use case they want to deploy on our platform. In 10 days, we stand up the first reference application AI for the customer, get their first-party data coming in, something that they can demonstrate to their stakeholders and stuff. And then in 10 weeks, we actually train that AI to go into a production-ready environment and ready to go and start generating insights. So, and we approach every customer, deployment that way because it's a very agile and fast-paced way to get value out of technologies like AI.
That's super fast.
Yeah, 10 weeks. Yes, yes, and it also forces you to identify the most critical problem and binding the problem that you can actually start seeing value, right? Mm-hmm. The biggest danger that most organizations have, and we've seen it over and over again, they go into the science project land. They go pick a project and say, let's go predict risk score for all my clients. And then before you know, there's client data coming in from 16 different CRM systems or transaction platforms. By the time you prep the data and make it ready to feed into the model and design your models, you've already lost 6 months. And then you start thinking about, hey, it's not going to be useful for me. Because by the time you actually get to value, sometimes AI is like, it's a world where you're not guaranteed positive results every time, right? It depends on what data and what output the algorithms learn from the data and then what output they provide. So you got to be able to rapid prototype these problems to see whether it's the kind of results you want to see. If it's not, and you made an assumption that you're going to see this great spike in your customer adoption pattern if you do A, B, and C, and your sampling of data shows that no, it's actually not that at all, then you can pivot and do something else, right? Mm-hmm. So that whole method is a very, very important, final leg of the stool in our view on making AI successful and enterprise AI successful.
Got it. Where do you kind of see this going in 5 years, 10 years, if we're having this conversation over a Shiner in Austin, Texas?
Yeah.
We're obviously not going to be in the Westworld world, you're saying.
I don't think so. 5 years is too soon to get into Westworld.
Right. So,
although we might have Westworld theme parks by then.
Well,
that'll be
probably.
That'll be interesting. I'd take a shot.
But where do you see the disruption at such beginning phases right now? People don't really know even what's going to happen. Where do you see it?
Today there is still a lot of hype and BS in the market about AI, right? 5 years, people will stop talking about AI, for sure, because AI won't be a thing. Nobody talks about, yes, we still talk about, web services, or we don't really talk about cloud anymore, right? It's just there. It's a thing. It's a delivery model. It's a business model. It's an operational model. So AI will power a lot of these core processes, both on the enterprise side, but also in our own human lives. I'd love to actually not having to type all my text messages. I would love for the thoughts to be directly translated into a text message and sent out, right?
Wait, without speaking?
Without even speaking.
You want
because I do it with
the phone to understand your brain?
Well,
Whoa!
Why is it not possible, right? The
guess.
Neuralink chips that Elon Musk is talking about.
Right.
But the idea is so you're going to start seeing these things and it may not be just a neurotransmission. It could be gestures, and it could be automatically understanding from your previous text messages saying what is a possible response. And there's a lot of those things. But the idea is AI will be woven into everything that we do, right? So it won't be a thing in itself.
Yeah.
Right? So that's one thing I do see in 5 years. That's going to be where the market is. You'll start, in the next 2 to 3 years or so, we'll start seeing a big, massive consolidation of the market too, right? In general, wherein today people look at, hey, I built a model for risk scoring. That's my competitive advantage. Well, models are going to be commodities, right? Mm-hmm. It's going to be an algorithm. And if you can Google, and if you have internet connection, you can get any algorithm today, right? And then you tune it for whatever you want to do. Yeah. So there's going to be that consolidation of the market that happens. I think we'll move beyond that hype thing to go in and say, okay, how can we truly move the needle for the business, for the individual, and so forth. The other thing I think we'll also start seeing some more advances coming in, like blockchain. It's still, over-promised, under-delivered kind of a technology, right? There's so much, because of the crypto hype, the cryptocurrency hype, it just is taking a nosedive right now where it's going. But there is so much potential, so much opportunity with the core blockchain technology, right? You can do better security, you can do better transparent services, you can do a lot more immutable services. There's so many things that is going to start coming into this land, into core enterprises and in individual lives. The other last thing I see is also, I think, in 5 years is a good enough time that we would have figured out how to miniaturize quantum computers, right? In some form or fashion, right? I know Satya is a big fan of the technology. I mean, it's fundamentally game-changing technology. It's nothing that, nothing like this has ever happened before, right? But, there's all this challenges around how do you run an environment at negative 400 degree Fahrenheit and things like that. Those kind of challenges, the physical, what it looks like and stuff, what that does is now it'll still take more time to get adoption and stuff beyond that, because now you have to think about how do I program for that? What's my programming model for running in quantum computers, right? There's a lot of things like that that's going to come up, but that's going to evolve. That's going to create another huge S wave of, what is the next generation of innovation is going to come from. But it fundamentally changes the game, right? And I know a lot of the industry experts or folks are saying, the threat of humans being replaced and, humanoids coming into play and supercomputers and super AIs, if you will, are coming into play is going to be real. There is always that threat, but 5 years is too short a horizon to even see that. It's probably 50 years out, right? But again, never say never. And I think, taking the optimist view, the optimistic technologist that I have, I think, this is already like the best time for anybody to have been alive, right?
Right.
In the history of mankind. It's going to even get crazier and better. I mean, of course, I do have the challenge right now. My attention span is less than that of a goldfish, as they say, right? It's 8 seconds, right?
Yes.
Yes. But there's all that elements that we'll have to grapple with. And I think, I'm hoping that in the next 5 to 10 years, humankind also finds an equilibrium with technology in that fashion, right? How do you get to that? Because we're still young in all these technologies that we've been using, right? So there's going to be that steady state thing that's going to come up.
Yeah, I mean, I was telling you about Brad Smith today, and he's talking a lot about, artificial intelligence being used for good and for the earth. And, what do you think about that? It's one thing, quantum computing just like blows my mind. I had Eduardo Kastner explain that to me, and I was like, what? Blockchain also blew my mind. And then I think, like, who even cares about any of that? Because if we can't educate, the billions of people, or we don't have water, or we have areas that are potentially underwater, this is what's the point of using all this technology if you can't help solve some of these things? I mean, what do you think about that? What's your company doing around that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And you're right. I mean, so just playing on our theme, and we started around augmenting humankind with machine intelligence. We started looking at, the best opportunities in the world is about doing things that we haven't done before that betters the lives of every human being on earth, right? And it's nothing more fulfilling than that, nothing more lasting than that, nothing more, proud to be, doing other than that, right? So one of the things that we've been working with a lot of organizations, a nonprofit organization, there's one called AI Global, which is incidentally, it was originally co-founded by USA, Saxena Foundation, and also Cognitive Scale and Data.World, some Austin companies, and now it's a global organization. What they're trying to do is, like, how do I actually make sure that the impact to socioeconomic impact of technologies like AI is minimized and, or is in the positive fashion, right? With them, we actually launched an initiative of two things. One is launch an open AI marketplace. So how do you actually have an open standard through which you can actually package any models, any data sets that is reusable across platforms? And the idea there is actually, how do you make it really democratized so you're creating new opportunities for others to use it, right? So you don't need to be that one of the 10,000 strong ML engineers, right? And how do you actually go do that? So, and that's one initiative that we've launched. The other one with them, again, is we announced that we'll be doing an AI ethics switch around this, where a specification for an AI ethics switch. It basically covers all the area that I talked about: transparency, explainability of decisions, bias, human rights, and data rights. How do you actually balance across all the spectrum, the entire spectrum, to do automated decisions using machine intelligence? In addition to that, one of the things that we are very proud of, we were awarded the World Economic Forum Technology Pioneer Award for 2018, and this is a great honor because the previous recipients of that are like Airbnb, Facebook, Twitter, Palantir, all the big names, and so we're really humbled and honored to be that. But one of the things we're trying to work with them is actually applying this at the same problem, right? How do you use this powerful technology and look at those biggest societal problems and solve them with it? I mean, simple things like detecting ocean waste, for example. If you have an image recognition software that can do object recognition and identification, you have enough footage, satellite imagery that you have, that we currently have, that can actually train these images with. You can have a pretty sophisticated system identifying ocean waste that you can then signal a not-for-profit organization who's working on doing that to go and pick up that waste or clear that waste or disintegrate it, whatever. Another classic example is hunger and poverty, where we can actually apply technologies to identify the socioeconomic class or the zip codes or the kind of folks who are more susceptible for actually getting into a situation and intercept that and do an intervention before it actually happens, right? I mean, it's the same patterns that we use in enterprises for business processes. It's the same patterns we use in our daily lives, but it takes definitely a platform like World Economic Forum's Technology Pioneer platform helps us do that. And we're also forming an alliance across multiple companies, including Microsoft and Dell and Intel, to actually see how can we come together to go solve some of these bigger problems, right?
It seems like you can't solve it alone.
We cannot,
No.
for sure. I mean, if there's one thing, we already have learned is AI is also another. This whole space right now in machine intelligence, it's not a one-trick pony. It's not a one-place stop, right? It'll never be. And it's always going to be the power of the ecosystem that wins, if you will. And we can go into a interesting philosophical tangent to that in terms of saying, if you really think about how human societies formed and worked and evolved, if you will, right? And there is ways we can actually do that to the technology community. I mean, today with people using technology, and tomorrow when technology is by its own, right? Then we can evolve a much more responsible society as a result than if you do it otherwise, right? So I think there's a lot of this thing, but the power of the ecosystem is not to be ignored, and I think that's the only way we're all going to win in this race.
So you're almost saying technology being the impetus or catalyst for a more inclusive humanity.
Absolutely. I think,
It's kind of a cool concept to think about. So many things tear us apart, but could technology actually unite us?
Yeah, I mean, if you even think about simple things that happen, like ever since social media, we see the Arab Springs and how you can, just the ability to actually dissipate information across large spaces and, opening up communication channels has had a lot of positive impact. Now, it's got the other side of the impact. There's the liberal camp, there's also the nationalist camp. So there's all those, that's human society, right? I mean, I think, but technologies, one of the most powerful roles of technology is that inclusive and integration of the entire humankind. And, it's as the doomsayers say, right, when you're going to get attacked by aliens or machines, I mean, you're not going to stand a chance if you're not united at that time. Right. So you might as well get your act together and start being inclusive right away.
That is true. That's very true. All right. Well, this has been an awesome interview. My last question is, for those that are listening, if you could give your best piece of advice as they're thinking about artificial intelligence and, if this is going to be not even a conversation in 5 years, what can they start to do now to not be kind of obsolete?
Yeah, no, it's businesses and organizations. The imperative is very clear. Adapt or die, right? I mean, it's the technology is already maturing at a rapid pace, and if you're not already doing it, your competitor for sure is, right? So I think it's going to be a competitive differentiator if you actually invest in it. So then you start thinking about, okay, how do I actually prepare myself for it? What do I do now, right? And the one thing I always tell, our clients have taught us too, and we tell our prospects and other clients and partners is start with the business problem, right? Yes, there is technology. Yes, there is models. Yes, there's algorithms. But start looking and defining what is the problem that you're trying to solve. And then you make the determination, do you have the right cognitive fit? Is it really an ML problem to solve? Or is it just advanced analytics, right? Or is it just, human, you just never be able to codify that. It's going to be human intuition that helps you solve it. That weeds out a lot of the lost and, BS projects people end up doing, right? Just taking that method approach to doing it. The second thing is, I would say, don't start small and start incremental, right? And how do you get to a model of rapidly prototyping problems and saying, is this the right fit? Do I get the right results? Am I seeing the right returns? And then go big, right? Instead of signing up a $100 million deals with big companies and stuff too. The other thing, if you're an organization, the other big thing that you have to start thinking about is skills, right? What is the evolution of your employment pool, right? There's going to be a lot of new collar jobs being created. You mentioned Forbes. I just wrote a piece for Forbes, got published last week or this week, which is about the new collar jobs in financial services, right? I mean, there's
new collar,
right?
Oh.
So you have the blue collar, white collar, but then
new collar.
Because we don't know, we haven't found what that collar is, right?
Yeah.
So
maybe we won't name it.
We won't name it probably. It's actually a very, on hindsight, I think about it, it's not a real civil way to call out collar colors, I guess.
It's not at all.
I do know why, though. It's about like the stains on the collar kind of thing, right? But it's
remember we talked about that diversity and
yeah, I know. It's like on hindsight, I think that shouldn't. That shouldn't have happened. But anyways, it happened.
Yes.
But I think there is going to be an evolution of new kinds of jobs and new kinds of roles that's going to pop up. How do you prepare not just your existing organization and employees for that, but your future generation, right? This means totally different. Already, as they say, millennials and Gen Zs are changing the way we are all recruiting and hiring talent. This is going to even be another step of evolution beyond that, right? So how do you prepare yourself as an organization, as a company, as an employment pool, as a family, as a friend, as a society to go take advantage of this? I think inclusive, think bigger, if you will, and I think, but start small and act, in tiny increments. And I think that's the only way you can learn. And then lastly, I think I would say for organizations, find the right partner for you. You can't do it all alone. Find the right set of partners for it. If you're interested in AI for enterprise business processes around financial services, healthcare, or digital commerce market, come talk to us, Cognitive Scale. We'd love to actually work with you. But there's a lot of other partners out there too. There's a lot of partners who bring in different parts of the expertise spectrum, right? Someone who knows the business process really well, someone who knows the technology really well, someone who understands data really well. It's going to be an ecosystem play. And so, spend the time, make small bets, do it iteratively and prepare yourself, beyond just the technology, right? That's
awesome. Well, where can people follow you?
You can follow me on Twitter. It's _GaneshB, or on LinkedIn.
We'll put it in the notes.
Yes,
LinkedIn,
please.
of course.
Yeah.
And you're contributing to Forbes.
And I'm contributing. You can. There's actually, I want to say, if you Google my name, and my last name is really rare. The combination of my first and last name is really rare. But I still found 2 other people. On the internet.
Yes.
One guy is somewhere he's a PhD student somewhere in North Carolina, and the other person is a serial entrepreneur in Chennai, India. Oh. Right? So I'm like, okay, I'm the third one.
Yeah, okay. So, got it.
I got to work on my SEO thing, but but you can Google me. But no, Perfect. It was such a pleasure. This is
Thank you
awesome.
so much for coming today.
Yeah, this is awesome. Have a good rest of the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening today, and check out the podcast description for show notes. Be sure to subscribe and keep in touch with us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter at MS Partner.